Vignette 3, Battle for Kama by Abdul Baki Balatz. The Kama area, located northeast of Jalalabad, is approximately 87 square kilometers in area. It is bordered in the west by the Kunar River, in the south by the Kabul River, and in the north and east by mountains. It is a large, well-irrigated green zone which was densely populated before the war. The Mujahideen in the area were all locals defending their home turf. In February 1983, I commanded a group of 35 men in my village of Samagore, 1 kilometer east of the town of Kama. We had Enfield and G3 bolt-action rifles and a few Kalashnikovs. We lacked the capability to launch major attacks, but conducted hit-and-run actions. We did not have a base in the mountains, but lived in the village. There were similar units in the other villages in the area. The Kama district Mujahideen were very fragmented, and we had no contact with many groups in the area, and so we couldn't help each other. The Soviets could deal with us piecemeal. We Mujahideen did not have a common contingency plan to deal with the Soviets when they came in force to kill us all. And even if we had such a plan, at that time our communications were primitive and most communications were done with messengers. The Soviets were close at hand. The Soviet Thunder Unit was stationed in Samarkand to the east of Jalalabad. They crossed the Kunar River and established a base south of the Tirana Gash on the plain, map 10-3, Kama. Then, at dawn on 15 February 1983, 20 to 25 of their helicopters landed troops in the mountains north and northeast of Kama. The helicopters landed at Mashingangar, Spinkigar, Dirgigar, Wutgar, Koke Babagar, Kakegar, and Tirana Gash. The troops on the high ground sealed off our escape into the mountains. At the same time, a detachment from the Soviet base at Samarkand crossed the Kabul River to establish the southern part of the cordon. The main Soviet ground sweep started from Tiranagar, moving to the east. We woke up to the sounds of helicopters and the lights of flares. We were facing a large force, possibly bigger than a regiment. I was saying my morning prayers when my guard approached and said, "Commander, things look different this morning." I told him, "Don't worry, our lives are in the hand of God, not the Russians. We are destined to die on this day that is destined for us. It will not be pushed backward or forward." The helicopters continued to fly over, wave after wave. I saw a group of Mujahideen from the village of Mastali running away between Wutgar and Dirjigar. As they moved along the road, the Soviets on the high ground began shooting at them. I saw 2 of them go down. Gurang was one, and the son of Ghulam Sarwar, the driver, was the other. Both were killed. The rest escaped into the mountains. We were close to the river, so we moved to the south of Kama, where there is a bushy area and a mosque. We took refuge and hid ourselves there. Everything was quiet in our area for hours. My Mujahideen came to me and asked what was happening. It was now 1100 hours. I said that the Russians would come when they would come, but we were hungry now. I approached a village for food. Someone came out and told me not to leave the hideout since enemy tanks were 5 minutes from the village. I returned to the hideout. Around 1400 hours, another villager came and told me to leave the bushy area since the Russians were going to set it on fire to flush us out. He said 8 tanks and APCs were approaching the area. We moved to the edge of the wooded area where there is a natural berm and took up positions there. We had 1 RPG-7 with 3 rounds, 2 Kalashnikovs, and some Marco Chinese bolt-action rifles. The wooded area was also full of civilians who were hiding from the Soviets, so we felt an obligation to defend them and the wooded area and prevent the Soviets from setting it on fire. I saw BMPs moving towards us. They stopped short of and bypassed the wooded area and turned toward Kama. It was now 1500 hours. When we were scattered throughout the wooded area, I received a message from the rest of my men who described their location and asked me to join them since the air assault troops were moving to Mashingan village. I took my 12 men with me and we moved to join the rest of my men. The Taudo-Obo Highway bridge was close to our village. I joined the rest of my men at that bridge, which was near the village. We decided that the Soviets coming from the high ground would cross over this bridge, so we took positions on both sides of the road leading to the bridge. As we were taking our positions, a group of Soviets moving toward us opened fire on us. A bullet hit the butt of the rifle of my cousin, the son of my maternal uncle, and smashed it. "What will I do now?" he asked. "I will find you another," I stated. As I approached the road, I saw my friend Habib Noor some 30 meters to my right shooting at something. I hit the ground and saw that he was shooting at 2 Soviets. He killed them both. "Get their Kalashnikovs, Commander," he yelled at me. I sprinted across the road and grabbed a Kalashnikov, but the rifle's carrying strap was around the corpse's body, and I couldn't get it loose. I saw a lot of Soviets coming at me, and they were all firing. They put 10 bullet holes through my baggy trousers. Bullets were flying all around me. I kept tugging, but the rifles wouldn't budge, so I abandoned trying to get the Kalashnikovs. I had an RPK-3 anti-tank hand grenade. I wanted to use it, even though there was no tank, to make some noise to distract their attention so I could get away. I threw the grenade. After 4 seconds, it exploded and made a big noise, and I got away to where my friend Habib Noor was. Habib Noor told me that, unless we crossed the stream to the north, we would not be able to engage the Soviets. He told me that since I am short and he is tall, I had a better chance of making it across unobserved and I should cross. I told him, "I am your commander, but I am under your command now." I ran across and jumped, but landed directly into the stream. "Oh Allah," I cried, "you have killed me without dignity." Then I made a big jump. I don't know how, since even a tank can't clear it, but I did and got out of the stream. Even today when I pass that spot, I measure it. I took up a position and fired my Kalashnikov. I killed the Soviet facing Habib Noor. Habib shouted that Soviets were still in the nearby houses of Shna Kala village. I moved down the path from the bridge to get at the Soviets. I approached that position, threw hand grenades at it, and fired my Kalashnikov. Everything was quiet after that. I looked back across the road. Habib Noor was standing. I told him to get down. He remained standing, cursing the Soviets and demanding their surrender in Pashto. At that moment, I saw a light in his stomach. He was hit and fell down. I recrossed the road to get to his body. I could see the bodies of Soviets in the stream. When I reached Habib, he died. He had only 5 rounds left. He was my good friend and was not even from our village. He was from the Amdazai tribe, which live away from this area. Fighting went on all around us. I heard shooting from everywhere, but I only knew what was going on around me. Sheikh Bombar, from my unit, came up to help. He had the only other Kalashnikov in my group. He had given his Kalashnikov to another guy and taken the RPG in 1 rocket and moved to my position. As he came, I saw tanks moving toward us through the fields from the Shna Kala village. The sun was setting. The air assault troops had come down from the mountains and were advancing. Tanks were coming from the west. We wanted to carry Habib Noor's body to Rangan Kala village, and from there it would be easier to take his body out of the area. I took the RPG and rocket from Sheikh Bombar. He wrapped Habib Noor's body in my Sadar, the all-purpose cloth that we all carry and wear. Then I shot the RPG at a tank. The tanks were out of range, and so the rocket landed among the infantry. The tanks and infantry promptly stopped, realizing that we had anti-tank weapons. Their halt enabled us to break contact and take Habib Noor's body out of the area to Gurdab village, about 6 kilometers further to the east. There I rented a camel, and we took Habib's body to his family at a refugee camp in Pakistan. We buried him in the refugee cemetery in Peshawar, even though his home was in Paktia province. His family is doing okay now since one of his sons has a job in Saudi Arabia. Commentary. At this point, the Mujahideen effort was uncoordinated and put the villagers at direct risk. The Mujahideen were poorly trained, and their lack of cooperation put the area at risk. Their personal bravery and motivation, however, turned the entire area into a defensive zone that slowed the Soviet effort. Later, as the Mujahideen were better armed, had better communications, and began to coordinate their actions, they were more effective against the Soviet and DRA forces. However, by that time, most of the civilians were killed or had left the area for refugee camps in Pakistan. The Soviet effort was well planned and used air assault forces effectively to seal the area. However, their cordon enclosed a large area which they were unable to effectively sweep. They needed to break the cordoned area into manageable segments and sweep those in turn. Instead, their sweep was uncoordinated and large sectors of the green zone were never checked. This green zone is full of villages and fields and requires several days to clear. The Soviets were reluctant to maintain a cordon at night, so they hurried through the sweep and missed the bulk of the disorganized Mujahideen. Vignette 4. Defending against the cordon and search operation in Parwan by Commander Haji Abdul Kader. In late January 1984, Soviet forces launched a multi-divisional cordon and search operation in Parwan and Kapisa provinces. The aim of the operation was to destroy the Mujahideen forces across a wide area stretching from the Charakar-Salang Highway in the west to Mahmud Iraqi in the east and Bagram in the south. Map 10-4 Parwan. This area is covered with villages and cut by irrigation canals to the orchards, vineyards, and farms of this fertile area. There were dozens of Mujahideen bases in this area that were affiliated with major resistance factions. Most of the Mujahideen were not in their bases but split up into hundreds of small units living in the villages during the winter. On 24 January, columns of Soviet and DRA tank and motorized rifle forces moved from Kabul, Bagram, Jabili-Siraj, and Gulbahar, at the mouth of Punshur Valley, to establish a wide cordon around the green zone on both sides of the Panjshir River. The cordon sweep operation was backed with extensive air support. The Soviets and DRA hoped to trap the thousands of Mujahideen in this area and to destroy their base camps. The Mujahideen reinforced their defenses along the major roads in the area. The Mujahideen expected enemy advances along these axes of advance and decided to block them to gain time to break out from encirclement. During the first day, the Soviet DRA forces deployed and established blocking positions reinforced by tanks, APCs, and artillery. At dawn on 25 January, they mounted attacks from several points including Charakar, Jabali-Siraj, Gulbahar, Mahmud Iraqi, Kala-i-Na, and Bagram. The action near Bagram. At that time, Haji Abdul Kader commanded some 200 Mujahideen in the Bagram district. His permanent base was co-located with a JIA base under Commander Shaheen at Debabi near Abdullah-i-Burj. His other base was at Ashrafi near Sharakar. His group was a mobile group and spent most of its time fighting around Bagram or combined with other Mujahideen units in Parwan and Kapisa provinces. During the Soviet cordon search operation in Parwan and Kapisa provinces, Haji Abdul Kader's unit, along with a 150-strong unit under Commander Shir Mohammed, was to defend a line north of the main Bagram Mahmud Iraqi road between Abdul-i-Burj and Kali Beland. To the west, HIH faction Mujahideen were blocking the Bagram-Charakar axis, and on the east flank, JIA units were covering the area on the left bank of Panjshir River, map 10-4 Parwan. The night before the attack, Soviet and DRA artillery pounded Mujahideen positions from fire bases that they established around the area. They attacked swiftly and engaged the Mujahideen on all axes with infantry and armor or pinned them down with heavy artillery and airstrikes. Their air force intensified the pressure on the second day as ground attack aircraft and helicopter gunships supported the attacking columns. Mujahideen communications were seriously disrupted and their tactical coordination dropped off dramatically. Haji Kader ordered his men to occupy prepared blocking positions. They were armed with Kalashnikovs, some 15 RPG-7 anti-tank grenade launchers, 3 82mm and 1 75mm recoilless rifle, 3 82mm mortars, 2 Dishka machine guns, and 1 ZGU-1 heavy machine gun. They also had a few 107mm surface-to-surface rockets. Haji Kader deployed all his anti-tank weapons forward and emplaced his heavy machine guns on the high ground behind the front line. Haji Kader split his force and rotated them in the defensive positions. The Mujahideen, who were not manning the positions, constituted the reserve and concentrated in Balukel and Sayadan, some 2 to 3 kilometers to the northwest. Kader's supplies and aid station were also located in this area. At dawn on January 25th, opposing artillery pounded Mujahideen positions for about 2 hours. The intensity of fire kept the resistance fighters down while inside their bunkers. Some Mujahideen took cover in the ruins and terrain folds and ditches. The artillery fire was accompanied by airstrikes and gun runs by helicopter gunships. The Mujahideen did not expose themselves during the fire strikes. A little after sunrise, opposing infantry, backed by tanks and BMPs, launched the attack. The attacking columns moved confidently, assuming that the artillery fire and airstrikes had destroyed the Mujahideen resistance. However, as they came within range, Mujahideen anti-tank weapons and machine guns opened up. They caught the attackers by surprise and forced the infantry and tanks to fall back. The attackers were not very aggressive, probably as a result of their fear of mines and anti-tank weapons. During the first 2 days, the Soviets repeated their attack several times following the same scenario. Artillery fire and airstrikes would hammer Mujahideen positions. Then the infantry and tanks would advance until they were stopped with withering fire at close quarter. They would then fall back. The tanks that were following the infantry were very slow to advance, particularly when some tanks were hit and the infantry suffered casualties. At the same time, the infantry would lose heart after being hit by withering defensive fire and would fall back to take cover behind the tanks. As the operation continued, two factors worked against the Mujahideen. First, the enemy penetrated Mujahideen positions to considerable depth on some axes. This raised the fear of being encircled by flanking units. Second, as the Mujahideen began to understand the scope and intent of the enemy operation, they began to escape out of the enemy cordon. This weakened the Mujahideen positions and aided the attacker. Some adjacent units left their forward positions at Qala-e-Beland sector and fell back. This forced Haji Abdul Qadir to withdraw his force on the third day to his planned second line of defense on high ground about 1 kilometer north of the forward defensive positions. For the next 3 days, the Soviets tried to break through Qadir's positions on the high ground. It was even tougher going for them. They used the same method of assault with the infantry leading and the tanks following, and with the same results. Toward the end of the week, hundreds of Mujahideen used the Qala-e-Beland sector as an escape route to their mountain bases in Khoi Safi in the south. The Mujahideen used a covered irrigation canal to sneak out of the area. Just north of the road, near the Qala-e-Na Bazaar, there is an east-west irrigation canal. Several north-south feeder canals intersect this main canal. At several points, the canal is bridged and covered to allow vehicles to cross. At these points, the main and feeder canals are covered. In winter, the irrigation system is dry and provided suitable escape passages. During the last nights of the operation, hundreds of Mujahideen escaped through the canals to Khoi Safi. The attackers detected this exodus only toward the end of the operation and opened fire on some escapees. Haji Abdul Qadir's men provided the rear guard and were the last to move out of the area after blocking the Qala-e-Beland sector for 1 week. When the Soviets and DRA finally entered the area, thousands of Mujahideen had escaped. Haji Qadir claims that the Soviets only captured about 20 armed Mujahideen and that the Soviet commander in charge of the operation was reprimanded for his failure. He states that the Soviets used several divisions, made elaborate plans, and fired thousands of artillery shells and flew hundreds of combat missions without achieving much. Haji Abdul Qadir's group destroyed 11 tanks and APCs and inflicted dozens of casualties on the enemy. His losses included 7 KIA and 18 WIA. Most of his casualties came from helicopter gunships. Commentary. Although the Soviet DRA forces overran many Mujahideen bases in Parwan and Kapisa provinces, they failed to destroy the Mujahideen forces which slipped out of the cordon or went underground. The Mujahideen enjoyed freedom of movement and maneuver in a large area until the Soviets and DRA finally penetrated. The Soviet DRA encirclement was very porous and was the case with so many large-scale cordon and search operations of the war, making it impossible to trap Mujahideen forces. The poor performance by the Soviet infantry and tanks against a determined enemy cost them dearly. Instead of mounting coordinated infantry tank assaults, the Soviet forces seemed to use each element separately. While a combined action could minimize the vulnerabilities of each element, a disjointed action maximized the vulnerabilities of both elements in the face of a resolute defense. The Mujahideen built a series of covered bunkers near their prepared fighting positions, and these bunkers enabled them to survive airstrikes and intense artillery barrages. Most of this massive Soviet fire destroyed civilians, houses, and the agricultural system. Lack of operational coordination among the Mujahideen groups cost the resistance some major operational achievements. While the Soviets failed to capture large numbers of mujahideen or to destroy a major mujahideen grouping, the resistance missed a major opportunity to inflict heavy losses on the Soviets. The mujahideen focused on escape when they had many chances to bloody their enemy by resisting on consecutive defensive positions in the area or by cutting the Soviet withdrawal routes once they were inside the mujahideen territory. However, this was not the first nor the last battle for the resistance. They were fighting a war of attrition and refused to become decisively engaged in their home area where the civilians and villages would bear the brunt of the damage. In this area, the civilian population remained in their homes throughout the war. Tactically, the mujahideen masked the fires of their light anti-tank weapons at close range. Several anti-tank gunners would fire at the same target simultaneously. This greatly increased their probability of hit, prevented effective counterfires, demoralized vehicle crews, created confusion among their enemy's tank and motorized columns, and prevented the employment of accurate Soviet indirect artillery fire into the area. Heavy machine guns usually backed up the anti-tank gunners to separate the dismounted infantry from the armored vehicles, keep the vehicles' crews buttoned up so that their vision was obscured, and provided covering fire should the anti-tank gunners need to leave their positions. Vignette 5. Last Stand on the Islands opposite Gurdi Kats by Malawi Shakur Yassini. On 24 March 1984, the Soviets sent a large force into Kama District. I was in Peshawar, Pakistan at that time. The Soviet force was not just the 66th Brigade, but also included a force which came from fighting in Laghman province. The entire force had some 200 to 300 tanks and APCs in it. I had two groups of mujahideen in the village of Mirzakhel. One group was commanded by Baz Mohammed and the other by my nephew Shapur. Baz Mohammed's group managed to get out of Mirzakhel before the Soviets arrived, but Shapur's group of 25 was trapped. The Soviets landed troops on the high ground overlooking Mirzakhel, and their tanks were moving in from the west. Map 10-5, Gurdi. Across the river, Soviet tanks were moving through Gurdi Kats. The mujahideen moved south from Mirzakhel to the low, flat islands of the Kabul River between Gurdi Kats and Mirzakhel. These islands are covered with a low scrub which offers some concealment but not cover. As they reached the islands, the Soviet infantry in Gurdi Kats began to cross the river with inflatable rubber rafts. The Soviets also moved a tank into the river to cross over, but it quickly became stuck. Feroz, a mujahideen machine gunner, sunk the rafts with PK machine gun fire. The Soviet infantry sunk into the river and several drowned. The Soviets also had 2 dogs on the rafts. The dogs swam back to Gurdi Kats. Mujahideen fire from the islands pinned down the Soviets and defeated their crossing attempt. However, at the same time, the enemy brought pressure on my group from both sides, and only a few of my men managed to slip away. They were exposed on the low scrub islands, and I lost 11 MIA, 2 WIA, and 2 captured. The 2 captured were Awazubella and Nazar Mohammed. The Soviets tortured them, but they did not break. They continually claimed that crazy Malawi Shakur forced them to fight. Eventually, they were released. Shapur and Feroz were wounded. Villagers took them to safe houses and kept moving them to hide them from the Soviets, who searched the area for 6 days. We could not retrieve our mujahideen dead due to enemy pressure. Many of their remains were torn apart by foxes and jackals. After a week or so, we buried what remains we could find. The Soviets paid a 20,000 Afghanis reward for recovering their dead from the river. When I saw the condition of my dead, I banned Afghans from helping the Soviets recover their dead. Let the crows of this country have their fair share. Commentary. The Kama Mujahideen usually tried to avoid the Soviet cordon search of their district by fleeing into the mountains, but the Soviets habitually used heliborne forces to block their escape routes. This meant that the Kama Mujahideen fought the Soviets within the Green Zone. However, the Kama Green Zone had a road network within it, and the Soviets could bring their combat vehicles into the Green Zone, where their firepower gave the Soviets a tremendous advantage. The Soviets used the same mountain LZs over and over again, but the Mujahideen made no attempt to mine the LZs or post anti-aircraft weapons overlooking these sites on a permanent basis. In this action, the Mujahideen were surprised and unable to escape into the mountains and forced to fight an uneven battle. If they had contested the known LZs, the outcome should have been less costly for the Mujahideen. Crossing shallow desert rivers looks fairly safe, but can be treacherous. On the 31st of March, 1879, the British Army lost 47 men, effectively a squadron of the 10th Hussars, crossing the Kabul River some 35 kilometers to the west of the Soviet crossing attempt. The Kabul River looks shallow and slow-moving, but it has fast, strong undercurrents that can quickly overpower the unwary soldier. Chapter Commentary. The Soviet DRA cordon and search usually involved a number of forces in a combined arms battle or operation. The Mujahideen, who had the best success surviving these, did so because their actions were essentially coordinated. They had developed contingency plans to deal with them, and they had built redundant field fortifications to slow the Soviet DRA advance and fragment their efforts. The better prepared Mujahideen always retained a central reserve and were adept at counterattacking the flanks of the attacker. The Mujahideen, who had the most difficulty with cordon and search operations, were usually separate groups who had little or no ties to a central Mujahideen planning authority, had worked out no contingency plans, and had taken no steps to fortify the area.